You know, we all love that story, right? The one that says, if you just work hard enough, you can achieve anything. It's kind of the foundation of how we think about success. But what if the game is tilted before we even start playing? Today, we're going to dig into the invisible structures that shape our lives and ask that big question: is hard work really enough? All right, so to really get into this, let's start with a story. It's about two kids from the UK. We'll call them Charlotte and Stephen. Now, here's the thing. When they were 5 years old, they both took these cognitive skills tests, and both were considered low attainers. So on paper, you'd think they had a pretty similar starting line, right? Well, their lives took completely different paths. So you've got Charlotte. She was born into a high-income family, her parents were graduates, and when she struggled in school, they were right there to help her out. She ended up going to a private school, got a degree, and now her chance of being a top earner is a whopping 73%. But then there's Stephen. His story is, well, it's pretty different. He came from a low-income family, his parents didn't have qualifications, he just never really clicked with school and ended up leaving with nothing. And his chance of being a top earner? A mere 7%. I mean, just think about that gap. It's absolutely staggering. Okay, so I know what you might be thinking. It's so easy to look at that and just say, well, clearly Charlotte worked harder and Stephen didn't, right? But is that really the whole story? Is it just about individual effort, about who wanted it more? Well, sociologists would say, hold on a second. There is something way bigger going on here. And look, it's a tough idea to wrap your head around, mostly because we are absolutely surrounded by these powerful stories of meritocracy. You know the ones I'm talking about. We hear about tech billionaires, like the guys who founded Atlassian, who basically started a company in college and became unbelievably successful. Stories like that, they really fuel this belief that anyone from anywhere can make it to the top. All you need is a great idea and a ton of drive. So how do we square these two things? How do we understand the huge gap between Charlotte and Stephen's lives and the whole self-made billionaire story? Well, to do that, we need to introduce a key concept. It's a term sociologists use for these deep, persistent patterns of inequality. And believe me, it's a powerful one. That concept is social stratification. And what's so great about this idea is the visual it gives you. I want you to completely forget the idea of a level playing field. Instead, I want you to picture society like layers of rock, like you'd see in a cliff face. That's what strata means. It's a hierarchy where some groups are just systematically placed in those higher, more privileged layers, while others are stuck down below. And here's the thing, this idea of a layered society, it's nothing new at all. In fact, this kind of structured inequality has been around in human societies for thousands and thousands of years. It's just, well, it's taken on different forms. And we can actually break it down into four major systems that have existed throughout history. Okay, so let's start with the most extreme system, slavery. This is where some people are literally treated as property, owned by others. And you might think, okay, that's ancient history, it's illegal now. And you're right, it is illegal everywhere. But, and this is a huge but, don't for a second think it's gone. The International Labor Organization estimates that right now there are something like 40 million people living in conditions of modern slavery. Next up, you have the caste system. Now, in this system, your social position is basically locked in the moment you're born. It's all based on who your parents are, and it is a rank you absolutely cannot change. There's no moving up. A really powerful example of this is the experience of the Dalits in India, sometimes called the untouchables, who are placed in this very rigid hierarchy for their entire lives. And then we have something called the estate system. If you think back to feudal Europe, this is what they had. It was all about legally defined layers, or estates. You had the aristocracy at the very top, then the clergy, and then pretty much everyone else, the commoners. Now, there was a little more wiggle room here than in a caste system, but let's be real, where you were born still pretty much decided your fate. Which brings us all the way to today, and the system that's dominant now, class. And class is a whole different ballgame. For one, it's based on economics. Two, the lines between classes are way more fluid. Social mobility, moving up or down, is possible. And three, your class is supposed to be achieved, right? It's based on your own efforts, or at least that's the theory. It's not just handed to you at birth. But, of course, it's not that simple. Even when we talk about class, there are totally different ways to understand how it works. So to really dig into this, we have to turn to two of the absolute giants of sociology who tackled this question head-on, Karl Marx and Max Weber. And you can almost think of their ideas as a great debate. In one corner, you've got Karl Marx. He saw society as being defined by one big fundamental conflict. And in the other corner, you have Max Weber, who looked at the same thing and said, whoa, hold on. The picture is actually way more complex and has a lot more dimensions to it. Let's start with Marx. For him, it all boiled down to a pretty simple, stark division. He said society is basically split into two major groups. First, you have the capitalists. These are the people who own the means of production. We're talking the factories, the machinery, all the capital. Then you have the working class, who don't own any of that stuff, so they have to sell their labor just to survive. And for Marx, this relationship wasn't a fair exchange. He saw it as fundamentally exploitative, creating a conflict that could never really be resolved. But then in comes Max Weber, and he really starts to add some layers. He'd say, okay, Marx, I get it. Economic class is super important. But he argued that there was way more to the story. He introduced two other key dimensions. The first is status. Think of this as social honor or prestige, the respect you get. The second is party. And this isn't just political parties. It's about your ability to organize as a group to get things done, to have influence. So for Weber, your spot in the social hierarchy isn't just about what's in your bank account. And if you thought Weber made it complex, well, modern sociology has taken it even further. We now understand that class, it just doesn't operate all by itself in some kind of vacuum. And that brings us to a really crucial modern idea called intersectionality. The big idea here is that all the different parts of our identity, things like our class, our race, our gender, or sexuality, they don't exist in separate boxes. Instead, they all overlap and weave together. And this creates really unique, really specific experiences of either privilege and advantage or oppression and disadvantage. There's a great quote from the sociologists McLeod and Yates that really nails this. They basically say that if you only look at class, or only look at gender, or only look at race, you're making a choice to exclude the other factors. And by doing that, you're missing the reality of how people actually live their lives. You're only getting a tiny, incomplete piece of the puzzle. So what's the big takeaway here? It's that all of this, all these theories and invisible structures, they aren't just abstract ideas for a textbook. Not at all. They have very real, very measurable consequences for all of us, for our lives, our opportunities, and our chances to get ahead. Let's look at a concrete example to see just how this plays out in the real world. We can turn back to the UK and its education system, where you can literally trace a direct pipeline from a very specific type of school straight to the most powerful jobs in the entire country. And when you look at the numbers, they're wild. Get this, only about 7% of people in the UK go to private schools. It's a really small slice of the population. And yet, that same tiny 7% group goes on to fill an incredible 71% of the senior judge positions. 71%. It just lays bare that incredibly clear path from an elite education straight to a job with immense power. And this isn't just something happening in the UK. Oh no. If we zoom all the way out and look at the whole planet, the pattern of inequality is even more stark. The richest 10% of adults in the world own 85% of all global wealth. Meanwhile, the entire bottom half of the world's population, that's billions of people, they collectively own just 1%. Let that sink in, 1%. So what are we supposed to make of all this? What does it mean for you and me? Well, it means that while our individual choices, our hard work, they absolutely matter, but they're not the only things that do. That social layer we're born into, our class, our family's background, it acts like a powerful tailwind pushing us forward, or a brutal headwind holding us back. And that shapes the kinds of opportunities we're even going to see in our lives. And that brings us right back to where we started, but maybe with a bit of a new perspective. We love to think of society as a fair game, where everyone lines up at the same starting line. But after everything we've looked at, after seeing all these invisible structures, you really have to ask yourself, is it truly a fair game? Or are the rules completely different depending on which team you happen to be born into?